A very good morning and welcome to Morning Express on this June the 2nd, 2020. My name is Michael Gitonga. Morning Express comes to you every morning, 7 to 9 a.m. right here from our studios on Mombasa Road. I'm not alone. We're with Trix. Good morning, Trix.
Good morning, Michael. And of course, it's a lovely morning. I'm looking forward to what's making headlines. Of course, the biggest story this morning and what will be our main discussion will be what came out of the speech made by the president yesterday on Madaraka Day and the festivities that transpire. And obviously, we do encourage everyone that's watching to be a part of the conversation by answering our question of the day.
Absolutely. And well, keep it right here as we are going to be going through what's making headlines this morning, but later on, Trix is also going to be looking at literally the speech that was given by the president yesterday and some of the things to take up from that. But of course, as usual, we start off with the newspaper review. But before that, the question of the day: 57 years after independence, what do you think ails Kenya? 57 years after independence, what do you think ails Kenya? Of course, there are those promises that were given by our founding fathers ages ago, and most of them, quite a number, have not been fulfilled. So 57 years after independence, what do you think ails Kenya? She is a Trix Ngado. I am at Michael G. Gitonga. The hashtag is KTN Morning Express. Let's hear what your take is. 57 years on, what do you think ails Kenya? But first, let's get into what's making headlines on the dailies. And we start off with the headline on the Standard: UHURU, why it can't wait any longer. And this, I believe, is referring to the referendum. And in this particular address that the president gave yesterday, he says, and I quote, that he discerns a constitutional moment, and not to replace the Constitution 2010, but one that is going to improve the rights that were made wrong. Trix, I think many of us will remember in 2010, there was hue and cry when the Constitution was being passed, and some said it is not perfect, but a time will come when those adjustments and changes will be made. Maybe Absolutely. This is the time.
Yeah, and that is what the president did say. It is time. He anticipates a constitutional moment, as the paper is putting it this morning. And this is also the top story on the Daily Nation. We're told why UHURU wants to change the constitution, with President Kenyatta saying he discerns a constitutional moment that will bring the end of violence experienced every other time we have general elections, among other issues. And he did actually allude to the fact that leadership should be all about justice rather than being self-serving, and that is going to be one of the issues that we'll be taking a look at later on as we dissect that speech that was made by the president yesterday to the nation, and just to keep us up to date on other elements that are being looked at: the urgency, values, politics, the future, and obviously hope. But another story that's still making headlines, and a very important key element that is being covered in the dailies, I think this cuts across, has to do with politics and that apparent attempted coup in Ford, Kenya. We are told that Western leaders are now pointing an accusing finger at ODM leader Raila Odinga. And on this date and the Standard, we're told Western leaders hit out at Raila over betrayal, and it's being put in quotes. And these are some of the stories that have been making headlines since yesterday. They are trying to figure out why they do not have unity, and they're saying that what is transpiring right now, particularly in Ford, Kenya, has to do with some higher power playing some games within their enclaves to sow disarray within them.
Absolutely. And the Luhya unity, of course, is one that has been very evasive. And at some point, one thought this was maybe going to be the chance and time where it would finally be realized. But that doesn't seem to be the case, looking at what happened in Ford, Kenya. And of course, like you've mentioned, accusing fingers have been pointed at the former Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga as the one in charge, or at the center of, scuttling that particular unity that was meant to be. And this was with the ouster, or attempted ouster, of the Ford Kenya party leader, and that is none other than Moses Wetangula. But there are also other stories, and on page 3, leaders are calling for vigilance in the fight against the coronavirus. Of course, we do know that this has been an issue that the world has, grappled with all along. And the president, even in his speech, gave his an indication, which he had given earlier on, that we could be opening up the economy, and of course asking the Ministry of Education to fast track the things that need to be put in place for schools and churches to be open.
Absolutely, and this, just to bring it into perspective, comes after we have recorded in 2021 cases of positive coronavirus cases amongst the 85,000 plus people that have been tested, to show that this is actually a health issue that is of concern. But at the same time, it's a balancing act. It's a catch-22 situation, and I do believe there have to be some very careful measures that will be put in place as they reopen, particularly schools. When you look at what's been happening internationally, there have been some very strict measures that have been put in place, and an adaptation to the infrastructure of certain facilities and institutions to ensure that while they are reopening, this is not a cause for more infections. Case in point, Tanzania, that is doing this already, and they're quite strict with their methods that they're using. I think that would be a good case study for Kenya to see how it actually all unfolds as they try to get back to normal.
Absolutely. I certainly do not envy those sitting in those decision chairs, because it's one of those, you're between a rock and a hard place, because opening up the schools is something that obviously is possibly needed sooner than later, because education is obviously one of those things that needs to carry on. But at the same time, parents are also asking the question, how safe is my child when they go back to school? We're yet to hear what they have put in place in terms of ensuring that these children are safe in school as they would be at home. One area, obviously, that one would want to look at is the area of transport. How do children move from home to school and back home? We do know that school transport is one of those areas that has been a sore thumb in the education system. And this is by virtue of the fact that children have to wake up very early. They're crammed up into one vehicle or several vehicles, then taken to school and back home. There's also the question of how will they social distance while in class? And that might be an easier question as opposed to how they'll social distance when playing, because of course kids are kids and they should be allowed to be kids. So are they going to change the way they play in school? So quite a number of things that need to be put in place there. Even how they eat when it's time for lunch, and they maybe either go to the dining room or whatever facility they use for their lunch, how they're going to do that. So of course the Ministry of Education having a huge tall task to ensure that that is put in place. But also churches is another area that is going to be somewhat difficult to control tricks. And I think this may be difficult because, we have people who believe certain things, and you're talking about matters of faith. Yeah. There are those who may now feel that because their faith carries them, they are not subject to contract COVID-19, particularly when they're in a house of prayer.
When it comes to matters of, religion, it's quite sensitive. You take the case point of Ghana, whereby they have said they're only going to be allowing 100 people per religious institution or whatever building they occupy. And then you have to ask, how big is this building? Can it actually, 100 people at the All Saints Cathedral might not be the same issue or rather situation in another smaller church. So I wonder how that will be implemented in terms of, ensuring that the numbers are controlled, the distance is kept, and everyone has masks on. And when you look at certain religions, composure is not,
they kind of go over the top.
Yeah, so will the mask stay on?
Absolutely, even timings. There are those, I think they would have to restrict how long a service is going to go on by virtue of the fact that people should not be in there for too long. But there are those who feel, if the Holy Spirit has come down and the Lord has directed us to be here all day, so that is going to be difficult to enforce.
As far as schools are concerned, also the Daily Nation is telling us you'll soon know when schools will reopen. And just looking at how the kids are playing, touch and, excitement is all that has to do with playing. So it will be quite devastating to some kids when you tell them, no, you can't do that.
Absolutely.
You can't play in this way.
All right. And another story that is obviously on the headlines is the case of politics, and specifically Jubilee politics. Today being Tuesday, there's expected to be parliamentary group meeting that is meant to deal with the National Assembly. We do know that the Senate was dealt with some time ago, and that saw the removal of the Majority Leader Kipchumba Murkomen and the Majority Whip Susan Kihika, who, by the way, according to a story on page 6 of the Standard, we have some of them, and specifically Susan Kihika, pledging their allegiance to President to President Kenyatta, I beg your pardon, to the president, and that seems to be a retreat that they've taken, because previously they were allied to the deputy president. So there seems to be something cooking tricks if we are going to sort of look into the crystal ball, because again, on the Daily Nation, look at what's on the front page. Is UHURU camaraderie back?
Yeah, and do you remember yesterday's headline that was questioning whether or not the deputy president will be in attendance of the Madaraka Day festivities, or rather the ceremony that was held at State House. Now we are further speculating whether they're back together again, and that question of body language came into play. But of course, it just remains to point out the issue that you can never, particularly predict what's actually happening when it comes to politics. So on page 6, as you've said, Duale, Washali, top list of Ruto allies facing chop at Jubilee PG. Very contrasting when you look at the body language and the supposed camaraderie that it communicates, and some of these headlines of what is going to happen or what they're predicting will happen to allies. It's quite confusing.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting to hear from, Farah Maalim, who has been, Deputy Speaker in the National Assembly, some of the things that happen and the intrigues that happen there, because to have somebody like Aden Duale face the chop as the Majority Leader in the National Assembly certainly is one of those things that one would have not seen coming. However, politics remains politics, and according to inside sources, it is likely that that PG meeting today is going to see the ouster of the National Assembly Majority Leader Aden Duale, and also the Chief Whip, that is Washiali, and there is already replacements that have been proposed and suggested, and we'll wait and see how that's going to pan out, because that definitely looks like it's going to be an interesting time for Jubilee Party.
Yeah, and an interesting angle comes out from page 4 of the Daily Nation, where they say while the agenda of the party parliamentary group meeting at State House today has not been disclosed, more heads are expected to roll at the gathering. That's the same thing as the Standard has said, or rather forecasting, where the deputy president will face rivals from Rift Valley, KANU's Gideon Moi and CCM's Isaac Ruto.
Absolutely.